Welcome to the fifth installment of 8 for our 2024 Grant Wood Country Forum online series, hosted by the Cedar Rapids Public Library, which we are most thankful for their enduring support and collaboration. And tonight we're looking forward to a full program, and we'll start out with getting some factoids from historian author Paul Jewell, and then we will move into a poem by participant Angela Evans. And then, of course, it wouldn't be a session without all things Grant Wood that's still in the news, still happening now with Joe Coffey. And I do want to announce that, speaking of Joe, next week's session will happen actually on Grant Wood's birthday, which is wonderful. And so for the occasion, Joe has put together kind of a celebratory session called Rural Rhapsodies, the Soundscapes of Grant Wood's America. And so we'll be looking forward to that. And if anybody wants to create a poem or do something creative around Grant Wood, please, by all means, do that and bring that next week. That will be fun. And also feel free to share the Zoom link with friends. This is not an exclusive thing by any stretch. And so I think I am able to now welcome everybody here yet again, and let's get going with Paul's factoids.
Thanks, Elaine. It's really been fun to put these together, and I have a huge list of factoids. So it's I look through them before each of our times together and decide what I'm going to use. The couple of them today. One of them is there were four. You all remember that Grant served in World War I. And there were actually 4 songs that he remembered from the war, and one of them was his favorite. His favorite song was Katie, and the other 3 songs were Over There, Tipperary, and How You Gonna Keep 'Em Down on the Farm. At one point in 1937, someone described Grant's breakfast to be 4 cups of coffee and 8 15-cent packs of cigarettes. One of the popes actually asked Grant Wood for one of his lithographs. That was Pope Pius XI, and the lithograph that was sent to the Pope was his lithograph titled January. And those are our factoids.
Oh, those are fun. Those are very fun. Thank you, Paul. And so let's move on to a poem. Tell us about it, Angela.
Okay, I'm ready. So the name of my poem is Cornucopia. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Stone City Art Colony keeps on giving. Today, the kids might not feel the ice houses. The studio conditions could go viral, not in a good way. And yet, love bloomed for Isabel and John. State fair winners grew on trees. Friendship bonds were harvested for a lifetime. Be grateful to those who continue to capture this bounty. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela.
Can I get a copy of that?
Sure. Do I have your email or?
I'll put it in chat. How's that?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great.
There we go. Connections. And inspirations. Love it. And so now we are swimming right along, and we're ready for the news.
All right. In Grant Wood news this week, the Ranolda House Museum of American Art in Winston-Salem is welcoming visitors to an exhibit featuring Grant Wood's lithographs. I haven't been here, but apparently it is a pretty cool place to visit. Art for the American Home, Grant Wood's lithographs, can be seen in the museum's West Bedroom Gallery. It's a small exhibit, but they've got honorary degree, shrine quartet, the midnight alarm, and the colored still lifes, fruits, vegetables, tame flowers, and wildflowers. Also, the Renolda House has the painting Spring Turning, by the way. The exhibition will be on display through June 30th. Encyclopedia Britannica has a couple of new updated entries on Grant Wood and American Gothic. No longer relegated to living room bookshelves between home repair books and yellow-spined National Geographic back issues, encyclopedias are online now, trying to inform the world like they used to, only with shorter, less scholarly entries wedged between Google ads. Presumably more reliable than a Wikipedia entry, encyclopedia entries are still somewhat of a benchmark of how notable people, events, places, etc., can still be distilled while covering the necessary bases. The Britannica editor who updated Wood's entries, J.E. Lubering, also contributed entries for the Iowa caucuses, the Renaissance, and Norwegian literature. Did he do a good job with Wood's entries? Well, you can be the judge of that. Go to Britannica.com and search Grant Wood and American Gothic and check them out. The little Grant Wood self-portrait in bronze, that little thing, maybe you've seen it. It's been getting some attention lately, most recently from the one at the Cedarhurst Center for the Arts, a little museum in Mount Vernon, Illinois, just between St. Louis and Louisville. That museum has one in their permanent collection. They just made some videos of it that are appearing online. You may recall seeing the one at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. There's also one in the Smithsonian's Portrait Gallery. Apparently, Wood gave out versions in gilded plaster as Christmas gifts long ago. And there are plaster versions floating around that the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art made at one point. Grant Wood pal John Stewart Curry is the focus of a new exhibit planned for this summer. The Muskegon Museum of Art is in central Michigan, just north of Grand Rapids. It has announced an exhibit called John Stewart Curry Weathering the Storm. The museum is describing it as a showcase reunion of Curry's most iconic masterpieces. The exhibit accompanies new research revealing a fresh perspective on Curry. As you know, Curry was the regionalist who didn't shy away from devastating natural disasters like storms and tornadoes. Iconic paintings like Tornado over Kansas and Baptism in Kansas will be featured in the new exhibit. It's a big one involving loans from the Whitney, the Cincinnati Art Museum, and a few other museums. As for the new research, that is by independent scholar and curator Patricia Junker. She challenges the conventional understanding of Curry and reveals the deeply personal and emotionally tragic inspiration behind his breakthrough paintings. The exhibition runs from late May to early September. And finally, in market news, a Grant Wood honorary doctorate lithograph sold last week in Lynbrook, New York. This was at Weiss Auctions. You're not going to believe this. Hammer price, $550. That's almost half of what the one I told you about 2 weeks ago sold for. It was in decent condition, not bad, but I just think this auction was a little bit off the radar. And there you have it. That's Grant Wood news for the week.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. I mean, you just never know what's going to crop up. That's what's so delightful about it all. I just don't know what to anticipate. Well, and here we are all ready to settle into our feature presentation, Bear Bathing in the Moonlight, Unpacking Grant Wood's Sultry Night, with multi-book author and historian who seems to be in demand everywhere for all things Grant Wood through the years, and rightfully so. Paul Jewell, take it away, Paul.
I'm going to share my screen here, Elaine. And Tonight, my talk is going to be divided into some kind of like chapters. And the first chapter I'm calling An Artist's Mind, or Moments of Inspiration. You know, it's always interesting to sometimes think of the choice of a topic or a title for a painting, a book, or a poem. Artists, like authors, pick out a title or an idea for their creations. So biographers and researchers like to look at the paintings of Grant Wood and try to decide what they chose to paint and why. Well, we'll never know for sure what goes through the creative mind of these people, but we can do some guessing. And this is certainly the case with Sultry Night, and also a bit of a companion piece called Saturday Night Bath. Both feature a hired man or two using a cattle or horse trough or tank to get clean after a long day on the farm. As I pondered this, I remembered Park Reinert's biography of Grant and how he wrote about a hired hand on the farm home of the Wood family near Anamosa. Now remember that Grant was only 10 years old when they left the farm, but the memory of this man named Dave Peters stuck in his head. I'm going to read to you a little about when Dave left the farm. And these are in Park's wonderful words in the biography / autobiography that he worked on, but never finished. And I think you'll be able to realize from this reading just how important the hired man was to the family. He was more than just an employee. He was certainly a member of the family. And these are Park's words. Once a week, except in the most extreme weather, Father drove to Anamosa to get the mail. His return from these trips always caused a bit of flurry of excitement in the household, although the mail seldom consisted of more than the Anamosa Eureka and perhaps one of the magazines to which Father subscribed. Once in a while, Mother heard from Uncle Frank Weaver of Omaha, or Father received a solemn epistle from his Quaker cousins in Virginia. But these occasions were very rare. And so far as I know, Dave Peters had never received a bit of mail since he had been working for us. That is, until the mysterious letter arrived. It was late October that he received this letter. Oh, I remember it very well, the evening it came. Father drove in at dusk, and Dave and I hurried out in the yard to help him unhitch the horses. Guess I'm a little late tonight, Father said as he climbed down. Here, Dave, here's something for you. He handed the hired man a long, bulky envelope. Dave took it hesitantly and started blinking at it for a few minutes in mute unbelief. Then all at once he turned and went like a streak across the farmyard and into the house. He was not at the table when Father and I came in to supper. He had gone straight up to his cold bedroom without eating. When I went to bed that night, his door was ajar and I could see him hunched over his dresser, a column of fog rising from his whiskered lips as he spelled out the words of the letter. The next evening, I was drawing in my favorite place under the table in the kitchen, and my mother was preparing supper when Father came in the back door and said, "What do you think, Mother? Dave Peters is leaving us." I stopped my drawing in vague alarm. "What's that?" said Mother in a shocked voice. "Why, has anything happened? Was that letter some bad news?" "No, I don't think so. He didn't say what the letter was about, but whatever it was, it made him decide to do something he'd been figuring on for a long time. He says he's going back to Cairo, Illinois, to get a job on the river." "Oh, pshaw," said Mother, somewhat relieved. "He's always talking about going somewhere. Remember how he went on about going to the Klondike that time? But he never made a move to go." Father sat down beside the stove. "This time, I'm pretty sure he means it." Mother shook her head slowly. "I'd about as soon believe you were leaving yourself. Did he say when he was planning to go?" Dad said after corn picking. Dave Peters leaving? My brothers and I talked it over and decided it was impossible. I mean, who would cut willow whistles for us in the spring if the hired man was away? Who would make us the toy windmills and paddle boats to sail in the horse tank? And figure-4 box traps for catching wild rabbits? Ever since we could remember, the hired man had been doing that sort of thing for us. He would make us almost anything we wanted, and when he had finished, he would go striding away, muttering to himself as if offended by our efforts to thank him. Oh, if Dave Peters went, who would tell us stories about Indians, buffalo hunting, and dark adventure on the great river? Oh, the hired man was part of our lives. He couldn't go away. You might as well say the sun wasn't going to rise the next morning. Still, Father seemed to be convinced that Dave was going to leave. I do hate to see him go, I heard him tell Mother. In spite of his grumblings and tall stories, I don't think I could find a better man anywhere. Besides, he seems to belong here. He's always been really good about doing things for me, too, Mother said. Even though he sometimes gets me so riled up I could choke him, but I don't think he's really going. I'll believe it when I see it. This conjecture was carried on strictly within the family. As usual, the hired man was non-committal and mysterious about his plans, and Father warned my brothers and me not to bother him with questions. Only once did I disobey this order. One afternoon when I came home from school, I found Dave Peters sitting on the back stoop, his long, grotesque figure outlined against the thick, glowing colors of the fall sunset. He was carving husking pegs, small pointed sticks the men strapped to their palms in corn picking for ripping the husks open. I sat down beside him for a while and watched. Dave, I asked suddenly, are you going away? He blinked at me in mild surprise. Well, I reckon, he said gruffly. Then I said, when are you coming back? He didn't answer this, but only went on with his work, scowling in silence at his nimble blade. But Dave Peters did not go when he had planned, for right in the midst of corn husking, Father had taken sick with a severe attack of asthma. He had been subject to the disease for years, but this was the worst attack he had ever had. I heard Mother telling Grandmother Weaver about it later, how he awoke after midnight gasping for breath, sprang out of bed and ran to the open window. All the night he struggled for air, his face as pale as a ghost and the veins of his forehead standing out in purple cores. On top of the asthma, Father contracted a bad case of the grip, and this combination laid him up for 3 weeks or more. During that time, Dave Peters took charge of the farm work and said nothing more about leaving. He finished the husking, got the corn stored for the winter, and did what fall plowing Father wanted done. Frank and I helped as much as we could, and I remember that during these weeks, Dave Peters taught me a great deal about farm processes. Most jobs around the farm one learns gradually and cannot definitely say just when he did start doing them. But apparently Dave decided I was old enough to handle a man's share of the chores now. He showed me how to do many new things and took great pains to see that every move I made was exactly right. When I was milking a cow or pitching manure, he watched me like a hawk. You can't pitch right just using your arms, he would snarl. Use all your weight. You can lift twice as much as it ain't only half the work. He instructed me how to hitch up a team, although I was too small to get the heavy harness on the horses alone. When I asked him why you had to warm the bit by blowing on it before putting it in the horse's mouth, he was eloquent in his disgust. Don't you remember, he said, how you felt last winter when you got your tongue stuck on the window pane? He growled. At last, Father was able to be about again, and the hired hand spoke once more about leaving. We'd been hoping you would change your mind about going, Father told him, but we want you to do what seems best for you. When you're ready to go, I'll drive you into Anamosa. Having declared for a second time his intention of leaving, Dave seemed a little lost and wishful about it. Nonetheless, he began getting ready for the departure in earnest. Evenings he spent in the frosty privacy of his room, packing his clothes and sorting out the odds and ends that he had treasured in the pine chest in his closet. He finished a hardwood teething ring he had been carving for Nan, and divvied up amongst my brothers and me some arrowheads and pieces of buffalo horn he had picked up over the years. But for all his mysterious preparations, he didn't leave, and as the days passed, we began to wonder if he hadn't changed his mind. Sunday morning came, and all the family got ready to go to church. But when Dad called Dave, the hired man replied that he wasn't going this morning. Goodness, said Mother, I wonder what's come over that man. This is the first time he hasn't gone to church with us since he's been here. That noon, when we returned from Anamosa, we discovered the reason why. Dave Peters had left. Walked all the way into town in this cold wind, Father said, shaking his head perplexedly, with that heavy suitcase too. Look, said Frank, he left something here on the table. On the dining room table in the kitchen lay a package wrapped in old newspaper. Mrs. Wood was written on the outside in the hired man's clumsy scrawl. Mother unwrapped the package, and inside she found a small book bound in worn brown plush. Why, she said, her eyes moist. It's a Bible he read every night. Oh, he ought not have done this. Jack and I cried, and everybody else was solemn and depressed. Dinner was a very gloomy affair, with scarcely a word spoken. Oh, we missed the hired man's crabbed, eccentric silence. The atmosphere of the house lacked savor without it. Well, said Mother, trying to cheer us up. Perhaps Dave Peters will come back in the spring. But we all knew in our hearts that he wouldn't. Wonderful words, aren't they, by Mark Reiner, describing that incident. So we wonder, don't we? Was it Dave Peters, perhaps, that Grant might have been thinking about when he painted the hired hand? Had Dave actually bathed in the outside using the horse tank? Where did the idea come from? Why did he come up with it? So chapter 2, I'm calling the paintings and the lithograph. Well, Grant actually did 2 paintings, and I'm sorry this is a little blurred. And they were based on the same theme. And the one, of course, we know is Sultry Night, and that was both a painting and a lithograph. And the other one was this charcoal drawing titled Saturday Night Bath. Now, there's some question about which was done first. It appears that Saturday Night Bath, the one you see here, was not shown to the public until 1975 in James Dennis's book, Grant Wood. And at that time, Mr. Dennis said it came from a private collection. The date has never been clear on either of these works. Some said Saturday Night Bath was 1937, some said it was 38, some said it was 39. It was never made into a painting, but in it, as you can see, we see 2 bathers, and their private parts are really discreetly hidden. Could this have been done after Sultry Night as a bit of an apology by Grant? Some have wondered this. But also of note was the barn in Saturday Night Bath, and it seemed to possibly be the same look that he would later use in the lithograph Fertility. But why would Grant create 2 paintings based on the same general topic? Well, we've now found out a little more about Saturday Night Bath, but many questions remain, including why it was never made into a painting rather than just a drawing. According to Sue Taylor's book, Grant Wood's Secrets, the image is now at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, Texas. And it was a gift of Dr. Jack Towsend in memory of Mary Nesbitt Towsend and was given in 2004. Now, when I saw that name, I knew this family. The Nesbitt family was from Madison, Wisconsin, and the original person who was interested in Grant Wood's work there was Dr. Wellwood Nesbitt. So I'm presuming it was his daughter that made the gift. I knew too that the Nesbitts had other items that were from Grant Wood. And here, well, this is of course Sultry Night. Whoops. I guess that will come later. Later on here in my PowerPoint, I'll show you that there was a portrait of the Nesbitts that was done by an artist and a good friend of Grant's. His name was Frances McCrae. And the McCraes, she was an artist too. They were real close to Grant Wood. And even the summer after 1941 that Park and Grant were in Clear Lake, the McCraes moved into that same cottage on North Shore Drive. I talked to Mrs. McCrae maybe 15 years ago, and she told me they still had a pair of Grant's overalls, and they also had one of his easels. But McCrae probably did the portrait of the two because Grant had already passed away, and they liked his work. And when you see this, you'll see the similarity between the two. Ironically, Mrs. Nesbitt died before the portrait was done. So she never got a chance to see it. And in the background of it is Lake Mendota in Wisconsin. I would guess, as I said, that they chose McCrae because they had wanted Grant to probably do this portrait, but he was already sick and dying. Well, not only is there some confusion on when Saturday Night Bath was done, but also some on the exact year when Grant did both the painting and later the lithograph Sultry Night. The painting was said to be done in 1938, but the lithograph may have been done about the same time. Some researchers had listed it as being released in 1939. However, an Iowa newspaper article dated it April 30th, 1938, and said that Grant at that time had completed 4 lithographs, including Sultry Night, which was then to be sold through the Associated American Artists Group. Bruce E. Johnson in Grant Wood, the 19 lithographs, writes, "It was conceived with the first set of lithographs in late 1937 or early 1938. Well, this is, of course, Sultry Night painting. And what we see in this painting, or lithograph, is a tall, slender man, a farm laborer with a farmer's tan, arms raised, pouring water over his face and chest from a bucket held aloft. In the dim light of a farmer's field, there's a single tree on a flat horizon, probably corrugated steel trough there, a tree's white torso that gleamed against the dark field, a tree, and a pale, cloudless sky. Well, why the name? Sue Taylor says he could have chosen names such as Muggy Night, Summer Night, Farmhand Bathing, but he chose a word that has a sexy connotation, sultry, as in passionate or lustful. Grant thought it was the best painting he had done in years. He had at some point put 2 cows in a pond in the right middle ground in the painting, a little different than that in the lithograph. Well, there was an uproar, and according to biographer Garwood, Grant invited more than 50 people to his house for the unveiling of the painting. It stood on a high rack over the sideboards, and both his dining room and living room were full of men and women that night. Strange to say, it was the men rather than the women who seemed embarrassed, but Grant really didn't seem to notice. It seems obviously that Grant didn't follow the time-honored tradition of shrinking and shadowing the male parts. It might be thought that Grant intended this painting only for select gatherings, but such didn't seem to be the case because he crated it up, shipped it off to one of the country's major exhibits, and sat back to wait for the sensation it would cause once exhibited. After all, Grant had lived and studied in Europe where genitalia was common in art. Instead, he got a letter from the exhibitors strongly recommending that the painting be withdrawn. There was a certain muscular insistence behind this recommendation. Grant finally agreed to withhold the painting and to sell it privately. Grant, of course, insisted that Sultry Night is a scene taken from his memories of childhood. In my boyhood, he said, no farm had tile and chromium bathrooms. After a long day in the dust of the fields, after the chores were done, we used to go down to the horse tank with a pail. The sun would have taken the chill off the top layer of water. We would dip up pails full and drench ourselves. The men never got into the trough or tank for fear of disturbing the settlings in the water. Horses are finicky, refusing to drink if the water has been disturbed. It sounds as if this might have been a summer ritual for the men in the family too, although Grant doesn't come right out and say this. Well, the painting suffered a rude fate. Grant said he was so bothered by the thought that some detractor might try to create evil where there was none that he sawed off the portion that portrayed the nude farmhand and burned it. More than half the painting remained, oddly shaped because the painting had been arched on top. Grant had an odd-shaped mat made for it and framed it, selling it to Dr. Wellwood, Nesbitt of Madison, Wisconsin. Trip Evans liked to call this framing a hayloft opening. Grant did make a few changes, so some called this painting Sultry Night with Cattle. And that's, of course, half of the original painting. And this is Dr. and Mrs. Nesbitt of Madison, Wisconsin. And that's the artist McCrae, Francis McCrae, standing next to them. I have read where Francis had a withered arm. He painted with one arm because of childhood polio. I've never confirmed that, but I have heard that. And as I said, Mrs. Nesbitt was already dead before this painting was finished. Well, art historians have had several ways of looking at the original painting, Sultry Night. James Dennis. Now, James Dennis was the one that really rediscovered Grant Wood in many ways, and he wrote the first book, the 1975 book, and in this he wrote the following. I think it's real interesting. The artist unveiled his American Adam as a natural man living an elemental existence. The fields of his own making testified to a partnership with nature as they spread out behind him. An old tree bent with age, a relic of the original wilderness, is effectively contrasted to a galvanized metal tank, the contribution of industrialization. Identified with the allegorical yeoman and his earthbound ethic of manual labor, the naked farmer culminates Wood's representation of the agrarian myth of plenitude. That was James Dennis. More recent historians, excellent historians, one of them is Trip Evans, and very respected biographer. He has a very different spin on the paintings, and he comments on both of the image. The first he's going to comment on is the Saturday night bath, which had the two farmhands. This is what Tripp says. As one figure peels off his nightshirt, the other dips his bucket into the horse's trough, scooping water in the direction of his companion's exposed buttocks. Let me go back to that so that you can see what he's talking about there. Exposed buttocks. The penetrative implication of this gesture is underscored by the phallic shape of the trough and the thick wooden pole nesting against it, elements that point directly toward the back-turned farmhand. Completing this visual metaphor, Wood places a gapping hayloft above this figure. Not only does the opening represent a symbolic state of penetration, but it also reminds us where the two men will sleep. As if to emphasize the importance of this site, Wood repeats its shape in the unusual arched form of the work itself, a framing device that seems to locate the entire scene within the darkened space of the upper barn. And he also comments on Sultry Night, and this is what he says. In Sultry Night, Wood transformed this sketch into a far more subtle and arresting image. We encounter a single figure in this scene. The viewer, in effect, becomes the second farmhand, whereas the barnyard has been replaced by a vast and seemingly empty landscape. By emphasizing the secluded nature of this setting and presenting us with a figure whose eyes are tightly shut, Wood magnifies the implicit voyeurism of Saturday Night Bath, even as he provides a great deal more to see. Not only does the figure's frontal nudity elicit an initial shock in the viewer, but the water's climactic impact also provides an erotic charge only hinted at in the earlier sketch. Equally significant is the change Wood made in the lithograph's title, substituting sultry for Saturday and removing the word bath altogether. Wood's title evokes only heat, darkness, and desire. Another excellent art historian, Sue Taylor, writes in Grant Wood's Secrets, the trough and the long spigot of the water pump that replenishes it emerge from the shadows at the far right to carry our attention in his direction, just as the leafy upper branches of the tree gesture towards him like the fingers of a great hand. The knotty anthropomorphic trunk seems to lean back in awe at the sight of this body, hardly able to support its own giant erection in the curious upright post that stands at the convergence of the diagonal strokes delineating the earth and those articulating the tree bark. These subliminal, animalistic signs of desire may have helped stoke the reaction of viewers unprepared for a male figure so starkly reviewed at his toilet, feminized in his specularity. Well, of course, when this lithograph was completed, there was trouble with sending Sultry Night through the mails. The postal inspectors looked at it and shook their heads and said they couldn't get it through the mail. And Grant seemed always puzzled by the fact this picture had been barred. Now, some were sold over the counter, and Grant gave others to friends. The lithograph wasn't openly sold to the public until 1959, and only 100 were made rather than the 250 originals that were usually done with the lithographs and signed by Grant Wood. And when it was sent initially, they put it in a brown wrapping paper so people couldn't tell what it was. As mentioned, it was the fourth of Grant's lithographs. Writing in Iowa City, a man named John Shelby said, "It's about as pornographic as a statue of Apollo." Nevertheless, it was withheld from sale until after Grant's death, when it was offered at a starting price of $75. Chapter 3. Who is this man? Who was the model? Well, for many years, no one really knew who the man was who posed for Sultry Night. It wasn't until Trip Evans' book, Grant Wood, that the guessing kind of began. Evans wrote, "The live model has never been identified, yet it is nearly certain Wood used one, not only given the work's immediacy, but also because the artist found it nearly impossible to create even semi-abstracted figures from his own imagination." Trip Evans says, of all the likely models for this farmer, the British writer Eric Knight presents the strongest possibility. Knight and Wood met in 1937 through Norman Forster a mutual university colleague. Now, later on, of course, Eric Knight was known for his novel Lassie Come Home, and Forster appeared in the lithograph that Joe just showed us, honorary degree. Contemporary photos of Knight, according to Trip Evans, indicate his marked physical similarity to Wood's bathing farmer. Dark-haired and lanky, he had the high forehead, prominent ears, and long fingers. It is probable, too, that the Englishman, like the figure in Sultry Night, would have been uncircumcised. Also a pun under the last name. Wood delighted in wordplay with his titles and was a punster and loved inventing nicknames for his friends. Thus the wordplay Knight and Night. Evans includes Sultry Night model was a writer and friend, Eric Knight. And this is a picture of Grant and Eric in the summer of 1941 in Clear Lake. But now I'm saying that there's a more probable candidate, and one I'm quite sure of, as Sue Taylor also believes this, I think. And this is the man right in the middle. There was an interview that was done in September 1993 at the State Historical Society here in Iowa City. And those present were Mary Bennett from the State Historical Society, Barbara Kent Buckley, and her father was Fred Kent. We know the park in his name. He was a well-known photographer at the University of Iowa. Don Roberts was there. He's head of the University Photo Service. And also a woman named Weller, and she worked some for Grant Wood during those years, taking him places, cleaning and organizing various things. And they all got together and did this taped interview. I've seen it and knew about it shortly after 1993 because of my friendship with Mary Bennett. But also Sue Taylor knew about the tape too. In fact, she did some of the transcribing of this. Weller, in it, the woman named Weller speaks of Wood's lithograph, honorary degree. She had actually taken a photo that was used in that. And she also speaks of Sultry Night, which she calls the farmer's bath. So when she refers to the farmer's bath, she's referring to Sultry Night. Some of the things she did, she went to Wood's home. Sometimes she drove him out on location. For example, she said she took him to the spots where he made both seed time and harvest. She used a 4x5 camera, and Wood usually gave her instructions about the composition. They also, she said, did the one for the tree planting group in Arbor Day. So it begins, and I'll just use their last names as they go through this process. Weller says first, and then just a minute, where's the farmer's bath? Bennett, oh, that's one of my favorites, where he's by the horse trough and he's pouring. Weller, yes. Bennett, a bucket of water over himself. Weller, well, I'll tell you, I had a shock. A park Reiner called me and asked me if I would come in and take, we're at one of those studios on Iowa Avenue. They're not there anymore. They were those little pointed things that Buckley says, oh, yes. Weller, down by the journalism, Buckley, across from the gym. Weller, I was to go in there and photograph a drawing that he had been doing on brown paper, wrapping paper with black and white crayon. And I went in there and there was this huge picture of the farmer's bath. And I nearly fainted. Bennett, was that known to people commonly that you were his? Weller, oh, no. Oh, here it is. Bennett, was that deliberately kept a secret? Weller, no, it wasn't. It was no secret. Buckley, well, I have to interject because Dad did take pictures of some of those, like the hands, the one on Dr. Bennett's hands. Weller, yeah, Bennett, those physician hands, Buckley. And Grant Wood did not want people to know that he worked from photographs. And he said, you must not show these to anyone. Weller, see, because that is new to me. That must be why I don't have any. Buckley, no, I mean, Bennett. Well, I was going to say he kept the negatives. Weller, no, he didn't. Bennett, what happened to them? Weller, they're dumped. I never thought about saving. Bennett, here's your claim to fame in the history of art and you dumped them. Weller, yeah, that's right. Buckley, but at his request, he didn't because it was a no-no at that time. Weller, well, he talked to me about photographs. He said that he just didn't have time to do them from Bennett memory. Weller, no. Buckley, on the spot. Weller, yeah, on the spot. He was rather apologetic, but he didn't need to be for me. Bennett, well, tell me about the farmer's bath. What was that situation? Tell me about that. Shoot. Weller, well, he did this huge drawing from photographs that Mr. Kent took, and I found the original negatives in the file when I was looking there, so I know who it was. Bennett, do you know who it was? Roberts, no. Buckley, I don't either. Bennett, who was it? Weller, well, I don't know if he's even around here now. You want me to tell you, really? Who it, his name is James. Bennett, his last name was James? Weller, uh-huh. Bennett, and what? Again, he was a friend or a contact of Grant Wood's? Weller, who, James? Bennett, yeah. Weller, oh, I have no idea. See, Kent thought I would never find them. He had them hidden. He had a whole bunch of these of James, a la Roberts, chuckles. Weller, so I just happened onto it. Couldn't help it. I wasn't looking for it. Buckley, oh yeah. Roberts, it had to be a shock in those days. Weller, it was a shock. Buckley, it is. Bennett, it's a wonderful picture though, when you think of it. Weller, and here I was with these two fellas, and they thought nothing of it, and of course, I had to go ahead and do my thing, and I was shocked. It was a shock. Bennett, he was unconventional to you. Weller, yes, but you know, it was to be printed in, I've forgotten what magazine, but the post office wouldn't send it. They wouldn't put it through the mail because it was a mail nude. And so they had to express every copy. We have different ways now, but then they had to express them. Bennett, did it shock you? Or did it offend your sensibility? Or did you see it as art? Weller, no, it was a shock. It was a sudden shock. Roberts, you weren't used to seeing that anywhere in especially photographs, I guess, or doing photographs. Weller, no, I wasn't used to it. And I thought, why did they get me to do this? Bennett, so you don't think there was any male sexism in the workplace? Weller, no. Roberts, he may have been cackling all the time. Bennett, but it's such a wonderful idea in that sweltering July heat and all you do is dream about that cool water rushing down your body. I mean, to me, it's the whole mood of it. So, Weller, well, it's a good idea. Buckley, well, I'll tell you, the farms, in that regard, it wasn't that unusual. Weller, no, I'm a little surprised that Grant Wood would do that. Buckley, I'm not. Weller, you're not? Buckley, Bennett, why would it surprise you? Weller, well, from what I knew he was a very quiet, soft-spoken person. I wouldn't believe that he'd be interested in doing the shock thing. It was a shock thing. Most photographers wouldn't do it. Roberts, he may not have viewed it as a shock thing. Buckley, see, I don't think he viewed it that way, do you? Roberts, it's a common part of country life. Weller, I suppose. That was the conversation. And, you know, I did some additional research on this to try to learn a little more about Howard James. And as I said, he's the man right in the center of this photo. And the research I did makes me even more certain that Howard James Sr. did the modeling for Sultry Night. The James family was actually quite involved with Grant. Howard James Sr. was likely used as a model a couple of times, which makes it more likely that he was this model. I discovered, for instance, that the James family lived for some time at Route 3, that's 3 miles west of Iowa City, on an acreage during these years. And I found an ad in the paper that Howard Jones was looking for someone to help with haying on 30 acres. The James family probably had their acreage in pasture. Now, this would probably account for the farmer's tan in Sultry Night. The family probably came to Grant's attention because Howard James Sr. was an art student at the University of Iowa during the 1930s. The Kent photographs that were taken of him for Sultry Night were probably taken on location, and maybe it was even the James farm itself in some field outside of Iowa City. Howard James also, interestingly enough, served as the model for the two wood choppers in the entrance hall mural at Iowa State University called Breaking the Prairie. Sue Taylor had contact, as I did too, with the Stoddard family, who were good friends. He was dean of the graduate school at the time Grant was painting. And they both identified Howard James as being the model for Breaking the Prairie. They even had above their fireplace the sketch before the painting was done. They were good friends. They're the ones that had a cottage out at Lake McBride. And if you go to Anamosa in that little museum, you'll see a Lazy Susan that was designed by Grant Wood. And that was at one time in the Stoddard home at Lake McBride. Well, here's a little more information, biographical information on the family. Howard James was a local boy. He graduated from Iowa City High School in 1932, and he was known to have entered paintings in the Iowa State State Fair competition in the 1930s. He married a woman named Catherine Ritchie, a woman born in Des Moines, but who may have also attended Iowa City High School. And it was thought that before moving to Rural Route 3, they lived on Melrose Avenue in Iowa City. Howard would later become a soldier in World War II, and then he taught art for 5 years in Moline, Illinois, at the high school there. And after that, he was named the head of the Elkhart, Indiana High School Art Department. He was their first president of their local NEA chapter, and he and Catherine had 6 sons: Howard Jr., David, Daniel, Timothy, Mark, and Joel. But get this, in the headline in 1963, the headline read, "Teacher dies suddenly while teaching an art class." Yes, Howard James was only, Howard James was only 49 when he passed. But that's yet not the end of the story. It goes beyond that, because Catherine, Howard's wife, and Howard Jr., his firstborn son, were the wife, both posed for the wartime poster by Grant Wood called Blitzkrieg. And the Blitzkrieg poster showed a mother sheltering her son and was for the British war relief. Now, Grant Wood wasn't an isolationist, and he really didn't say a lot about the war in Europe, but seemed to hope that Roosevelt could somehow keep America safe. But of course, Grant was actually in the University of Iowa hospitals in his final illness when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor and America entered the war effort. This work, Blitzkrieg, was called a World War II Allied aid poster and was colored, as you see. The request for the poster came from Mrs. Ernest Lubitsch, whose husband was a movie director in California. The group which she was part of was called Bundles for Britain. The Lubitschs had left Germany before the Nazi regime, but they knew how the air raids were taking a toll on England. The United States was not yet at war, but Grant created this stunning image of bombers in the sky and a terrified mother protecting her son, shielding his body with her own. And Blitzkrieg was then auctioned off to provide money for the organization. Well, there is a bit of a postscript to all of this. And the postscript was that Sue Taylor, as she did her wonderful work and research, she sought the man named David Zephaniah Peters. She tried to find him, but he wasn't listed in any of the Social Security death indexes or the annals of the Alexander County Clerk in Illinois, but he might have been born kind of before predated records. And there was also quite a bit of confusion on really what county he had been born in, or whether he was even born in Illinois. The young boy in Blitzkrieg, Howard Anthony James Jr., the son of the man who posed for Sultry Night, he was born in January 1935. And I found that in 1936, at the age of 14 months, they entered him in the Healthy Baby Contest at the Iowa State Fair. Now, once grown, Howard Jr. would go into journalism for a career, and he was with the Chicago Tribune as a reporter in 1963, and then became the city editor for the Morning Democrat in Davenport. Later, in 1968, he served as the Midwest Bureau for the Christian Science Monitor, and he was a U.S. Navy veteran of the Vietnam War, dying in August of 2002 at the age of 70 years. Yep. And that's what I have. Thank you. Thanks.
Bravo, bravo. All those chapters. Loved that.
Well,
Oh
I
my gosh.
thought it would run a little longer. That's why I asked for some additional time, but maybe that'll open it up for some questions. I don't know whether I can answer them all, but I can try. Arliss?
Did you talk to Mary Bennett about her? Any of her remembrances? Do you know? You said
No,
Is it
really nothing other than that transcribed.
okay. She never gave her.
She didn't say much about it. Of course, you're talking here about a man that was raised in the community.
Yeah.
So that was something that needed to be kept quiet, I think,
Yes.
at that time, until Howard was into his career and away from Iowa City.
Great research. What a wonderful piece of information now that we have.
Thank you. Anything else that I had to say a few words there I never thought I'd be saying in public on Zoom.
Well, we're
Paul,
we're a
you get
we're a
that?
receptive crowd.
Yeah, I know you are. I wasn't that worried about it, that's for sure.
Paul, where did you get where did you find the whole conversation piece that you were reading?
Is at the State Historical Society of Iowa here in Iowa City.
Oh, okay.
So you can read the entire thing too, if you wish. Mary Bennett is no longer with them, so we can't get to her firsthand, but the transcription is there. You know, the other thing about it is I quoted three really good authors and in James Dennis, in Sue Taylor, and in Trip Evans. It's just wonderful how historians, whether you agree with them or not, they can put things in a perspective that you've never thought about before. And that just opens up your way of thinking about so many things, I think. And so it's never a case of I'm right, he's wrong. It's more a case of, well, this is how I see it. And it might add another layer, and certainly has added some layers to, I think, the importance of Grant Wood and the fact that he is known by so many now for so many different things. Yeah, Sylvia, you're muted, Sylvia. Yep.
Can you say again, Paul, where the small studios were they?
Yeah.
Where they were?
I
I'm
think
trying
they
to-
were in, I think they were in the first block from the old Capitol as you're going down Iowa Avenue. I think there was a series in there. I think it's now a science building that's in there.
Okay.
But I've read about them before when he took other people down there to do some modeling. And they were just some small buildings that were taken out years ago.
Okay, I was
Yeah.
just curious because I was trying to picture
Yeah.
what part of Iowa would be. Thank you.
Is that where the engineering building would be now or not that side?
On that corner is where the old YMCA was, they called it.
Oh, it was. Okay.
Yeah, but it's, you've got Clinton, and
Yeah.
then it's the very first block, and it would be
Right.
on the north side of that block.
Okay. Yeah, I see it there.
I think where
Mhm.
they were. I've never seen a photo of them, but they've been described by a couple of other, I'm doing this work on people who posed and modeled, and a couple of other people have said that's where they went for the modeling.
Have you shared your information yet with Trip?
No,
And
Sue,
Taylor?
no, I haven't. Sue discovered a lot of this though too, and if you read Sue's book, you'll see some of her interpretations. I don't think any of them though linked up Blitzkrieg with the James family. That's kind of new to most people. Other thoughts or comments? It doesn't have to be a question.
Well, one thing I noticed was the detail to the trees.
Right.
Where in some of those other paintings, they're like somebody had called before the lollipop trees. But those trees were so detailed, they really looked, and the leaves looked so real,
And you wonder whether that tree existed by a trough on the farm of Howard James, whether that was something that was there or whether he took creative license and painted the trees in. Marlis and I were talking about where the people did bathe. Of course, they didn't bathe as often as we bathe, for one thing. But in where my father was born, in the house he was born, you walked in the front door, which was actually the back door, but there was stairs that went upstairs. And we'd go up those stairs and it led to a single room that was totally blocked off from the rest of the upstairs. And that was the hired man's room or the hired girl's room. So they did all functions, but when it came time to go to bed, that part of the house was sealed off from the rest. And then I got to thinking about the baths, and would ever the hired man be allowed to use the steel bathtub that was in the house? Or did they just always have to use something outside? Would that be too personal to have a hired man using the same utensils that for bathing that the family used? There are just a lot of thoughts that kind of run through your mind on something like this.
I think you appreciate it because you grew up on a farm,
Right?
not quite as back, simple as your dad's.
Right.
Still, I mean, I even grew up down in the city of Dubuque, and I think when I was very young, only probably took a bath once a week. And
Right.
lots of times we did well, we didn't even have hot water. Mom had the heat water for it, even though it was a old building that we rented. But my sister and I used the water first, then Mom added water, and then she took it, and then finally Dad. And I don't think that was uncommon. So baths, even back in the 1950s, were, makes it sound like we really were old, but we can understand.
Well, yours sounds a little different than many, because many times the dad got the first go at the bathtub. And you
Oh,
didn't want to throw the baby out with
well,
the
yeah.
water, So the baby was the last one to get a bath.
Poor baby.
Paul, we've got a question here.
Yeah.
And it's related to the models, which it makes me think too, it'd be kind of interesting to see if there's any, I mean, to what degree he used models, more than once, But the question is anybody familiar with the model for Midnight Alarm, lithograph, or Shop Inspector?
I am familiar with Midnight Alarm. And I'd have to pull out my records, but it's a man from Gustavus Adolphus. They had an exhibit there of Grant Wood's lithographs. And he thinks he knows who the man was that modeled for Midnight Alarm. What was the other one, Elaine?
Shop Inspector. It looks like from those cherry.
Oh yeah,
Cherry
they know. We know who all of those men were.
Mhm.
Actually, in my research, I found about 100 people that have been named as modeling for Grant Wood, and of course, a lot of people we don't know. Let me just read to you, because I've got it right here. That's the Hillstream Museum of Art, and that's at Gustavus Adolphus up in Minnesota. But I don't know whether the man he thinks it is John Arthur Mooney. And if you've ever been in Charles City, they have a nice art museum at their library. And we know that the two men knew each other. Grant Wood did know him. And there are several of Grant Wood's lithographs I know at that museum. It's well worth a stop. And he thinks that John Arthur Mooney might have been the man that was used in Midnight Alarm. And I don't know whether you can see this. But this is the man that he thinks modeled. It's a young picture of him. So there's been some speculation.
Great.
We were lucky enough to have a few people, and Steve has helped me with this on a couple of people from the Stone City area that later said they had modeled for Grant Wood. So I've been collecting some information on them too. One guy was from Amber and gave a couple of interviews about what happened and what happened to him during that time. don't know when I'll get this all finished, but I think it'll be interesting to read when it's done.
Paul,
Yeah, Sylvia?
in the picture that Grant Wood, the painting that Grant Wood cut off part of it and
Yeah.
then put cows in,
Right.
what are people's reactions to those cows? Because, you know, Grant did such a very fine, beautiful, detailed work on animals, like the two horses in the summer night, or I can't think of the, not sultry night, but anyway, they're very beautifully painted horses with, you know, they're obviously draft horses and stuff. But then the cows in the other picture, maybe it's just me, but
No,
they look almost,
they just look like they're peeking out there at you.
listen, they look almost cartoony
Yeah.
to me, to my eye. They don't look like
My
the way.
thought would be that Grant was just disgusted with the whole thing.
Well, that was kind of what I was wondering, is that like, okay, you don't want to look at the human body. Look at these cows. They're just,
And he did that some other times too. One time he was going to do a painting, and he even had the model selected, and it was going to be called red underwear or something like that. I can't. Red flannel underwear, Joe, maybe you know. And he advertised to get somebody with an authentic pair because he was he wanted the detail. And then some people accused him of publicizing himself, which they didn't think he should have done that. And so there were those times in his life that he did become frustrated and a bit angry over some kind of criticism of his work. I have seen that half. They had it one year at the Stone City art when Stone City and Anamosa had their art fair. They brought in that one half of the painting. At that time, there was controversy over who owned it, I think. Because I think it had been given originally to, I shouldn't even say, because I don't know for sure how that story goes. But there was some controversy over that half a picture with the very unusual frame that goes up to. Maybe it was Arnold Pyle, maybe he had originally had it, and the Wellwoods bought it. I'm not sure.
Was the original picture ever owned by anyone other than Grant?
I don't think so.
No, and then it got cut up, but
Yeah.
then it moved on.
Yeah. Well, that's all I can think of. I don't, if nobody else has any comments on it. It was sure fun to research, I'll tell you that.
I bet. Hey, and Joe did put the link in the chat
Good,
to the Hillstrom exhibit.
good.
So take advantage of that. Oh, Mary. Question, Mary?
No, not really. I was just trying to applaud Paul, and I hit the
Okay.
wrong icon.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, this is what we do. People present, we talk around things, and then we do it again the next week. And like I said, next week it's the Rural Rhapsodies, the Soundscapes of Grant Wood's America with Joe Coffey, in celebration of Grant Wood's actual birthday day. So that's exciting. Thanks again, Paul, for that wonderfully researched project, and appreciate that so much. And then after Joe does his celebration session next week, we'll have 2 more sessions. On February 20th will be the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, exploring Grant Wood art, whatever they'd like to report about Grant Wood and art. We will hear from Sean Ulmer. And then we'll also hear about Grant Wood Places, the Shakespeare Garden with Barbara Feller on the 20th. And on the 27th, our last session, there'll be Grant Wood and Regionalist Places Then and Now, with a slightly different twist, would be with photographer Ben Staley. Is that how you say it, Paul? Staley. Yeah. And so we have some things coming up, and you're always welcome to share your poems also.